Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on long-term care policy options, state, national, and international perspectives. A couple of housekeeping notes first before we start with the program and talking about the background for this webinar today. You are in listen-only webinar, but you should have access to the Q&A button in Zoom. So please submit your questions throughout the webinar. We have released a policy brief that really focuses a little bit more on the comparative perspectives. We really would not have that much time to look at international examples in our webinar today, although we have some great experts on the panel about that. But please look at our webinar, at our policy brief that was released in conjunction with this webinar to see some international examples of countries that have worked on providing long-term care policies and supports to their caregivers and older adults and people with disabilities. So I would like to start off with some background, and of course definitions are always very helpful in this setting. So we're using a definition about long-term care that is person focused, that comes from the World Health Organization. And the definition of long-term care is the range of personal, social, and medical services that ensure people can maintain a level of functional ability consistent with their basic rights and human dignity. So those services are actually a wide range of services. They include home and community-based care, nursing home care, and then a variety of other support services that assist both disabled and elderly individuals with activities of daily living. Currently in the United States, the majority of caregiving is provided through unpaid family caregiving. According to one of the reports that we cite in the brief, about 60%, a little bit more than 60% of caregiving hours are provided by family members. The remainder, what is paid caregiving, the majority of it is provided by Medicaid and then followed by private out-of-pocket expenses and private long-term care insurance. So as you will hear from our panelists today, there have been discussions and actually there are state actions that have been taken to try to address these concerns about the sustainability of long-term care as we are facing an increasingly aging population. So to set the stage just briefly, Medicaid, which is as I said, the primary payer, basically supports about 6 million beneficiaries, roughly split in half between people with disabilities and older adults. Then family caregiving is really not supported by much of our policies. We have some limited paid family leave, mostly from the states that have started implementing these programs. The federal paid family leave program, the FMLA, is not paid. The federal medical leave program is unpaid, right? And then we really don't have any programs that significantly reimburse costs of expenses or provide other payments for caregiving services. Other countries, which we discuss in the policy brief, have focused on long-term care insurance as the primary program, and then they provide additional supports for community services and family caregiving. We specifically feature 4 countries in the policy brief. So we have Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, and South Korea. So today's experts panel will discuss the need for an improved LTC system in the United States and also current state and federal policies, including the Washington program, WACARES. Let me introduce very briefly our panelists, and you can see more detailed bios on the event webpage. Angie Chen is the Associate Director of Savings and Household Finance at the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. She's dedicated to promoting lifelong financial security. Her current research revolves around debt burdens, multi-generational impacts of low savings, health and long-term care risks, and effective measures of well-being. She's also in charge of the center's well-known National Retirement Risk Index. Nicole Jarwick is the Chief Program Officer at Caring Across Generations. She's an experienced policy professional supporting advancements in disability, aging, and direct workforce policy and mobilization. She leads and supports many coalitions to advance the priorities of the care movement, including strengthening and expanding access to Medicaid, home and community-based care, and better pay for direct care workers. Nicole is a member of the President's Committee on People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Nicole is, most importantly, a sibling to her brother, Chris, who is 35 and has autism, a former direct care worker, and on the care team for her 3 grandparents in their 90s. Allison Cook is the founder of Better Aging and Policy Consulting. She works with an array of organizations to build a system that better supports older adults and those who care for them. Recent projects have included exploring alternative long-term care supports and services financing models with MIT CoLab, exploring how to invest in the home care workforce with the National Academy of Social Insurance. Stay tuned for this one. Facilitating philanthropy's role in building publicly supported care infrastructure across the lifespan with the Care for All with Respect and Equity Care Fund, and supporting innovative startups in the field of aging with Mary Furlong and Associates. And of course, last but not least, this is in alphabetical order, Ben Bechte is the director of the WA Cares Fund, the nation's first universal long-term care insurance program in Washington state. He's a board member of the American Society on Aging, an MIT CoLab Milking Community Fellow, and a member of the Care Guild, a group of 125 innovators redesigning care for the 21st century. Ben is an expert on US and OECD social policy with recent publications on the German and Dutch long-term care systems. His research and policy work focus on developing new policies that improve the economic security of families and support them in balancing work and care. Welcome to all of our panelists. I'm really excited to have this event, and I will just do a very brief announcement that this panel is actually all participants in our 2025 Retirement Security Symposium. Stay tuned for more announcements about that. So our discussion first will proceed with a presentation on long-term care needs, gaps, and this all came from a series of studies that the Center for Retirement Research did a couple of years ago, and Angie will start us off with her presentation.
Thank you, Raina, for the wonderful introductions. I'm very excited to be part of this panel and to share some of our research and also learn from our other panelists today. So I'm just going to be giving a brief overview of a couple of studies that came out a few years ago. I did update some numbers about long-term care needs, gaps, and caregiver support. Next slide, please. And so this is our model that we had, and this provides an overview or projection of the share of 65-year-olds who are likely to need long-term care by level and duration, intensity and duration. And as you can see, most older adults will need some form of long-term care, although the level of need and the duration varies dramatically. So only about 20% will actually get away scot-free, no long-term care. But then, about a quarter will have low intensity needs. And then about, 20% will have the needs that we kind of all fear, which is high intensity, which means help with 2 or more ADLs for 3 or more years. Next slide, please. And of course, there's variations across, demographic and socioeconomic groups. So as expected, those with less education, non-whites, and women are all more likely to need care. So this table just kind of cuts across, the total, the likelihood of needing long-term care and whether that is going to be, on for physical or cognitive. Next slide, please. And so, as we all know, and as Raina said in her introduction, that family caregivers provide the majority of care, even for those with high needs. And so they provide the mass majority for low and medium needs. And then at high intensity need levels, there's often a need to bring in paid help, both because of the skill level needed and also because of the number of hours. But still, regardless, family caregivers provide the vast majority at all need levels. Next slide, please. And so, but even with lots of informal support, and this is before Medicaid cuts, many households will still fall short. So this is from our estimate from a few years ago, but we did analysis comparing families' private financial resources. We do set aside sort of, we took look at their total amount of savings and wealth. We set aside an amount for basic, very basic essential needs of housing and food, et cetera. And then we also count in if there is family, like children, to help the number of family hours that could be available. And then we also run a model to see who is likely to spend down to Medicaid, who directly qualify or is likely to spend down to Medicaid. And so if we just look at private family resources, we see that about 40% might have unmet needs, that's including all of their family and financial resources. Now, including Medicaid, we see that obviously that share drops, but still a substantial number of households may still have unmet needs as they age. Next slide, please. And so who are these people? Women are more likely to fall short of their care needs, even with Medicaid. That is because, women tend to live longer. And then so also, if it's a household where both spouses need long-term care, then a lot of the household resources are used for the spouse that is shorter lived, which is often the male spouse. And then the woman who lives longer will have fewer household resources when they need the care, and they also tend to live longer. Next slide, please. And so also, this is not surprising, people with higher educational attainment are less likely to fall short. But even then, so even with a College Plus group, still over 20% may fall short of their care needs. When we go to the high school or less than high school group, that gets closer to 40%. Next slide, please. And then when we look at cross demographic groups, the pattern is a little bit more mixed because of Medicaid's income and asset tests, and also the availability of family caregivers. But we still see that a large share across all racial and ethnic groups are at risk of falling short or having unmet needs. This is including Medicaid.
Great, thank you, Angie. This is really a great overview of the needs for older adults. Nicole will actually continue this part of the discussion with a focus on people with disabilities and the role of Medicaid.
Yes, thank you so much. And so glad to be here. Thank you to the Harkin Institute for bringing us all together, and for continued conversation around this incredibly important topic that is something that I know personally and professionally, as Raina laid out in my bio, which also makes today a little bit hard because one of the main program that does fund long-term care, there are massive cuts that just moved forward. So to name that is something that we have to be really focused on because of the outsized role that Medicaid plays in the provision of long-term care for older adults and also for people with disabilities. Something that's really important is the way that the intersection between disability services and aging services and the way that advocates and research and everything really needs to focus on those things together too, because there is so much misconception around, especially for older adults, around Medicare as an example. And there are some disabled people who also qualify for Medicare via the duals program, and but that we did polling at Caring Across Generations that showed that 93% of people polled believed that Medicare should cover long-term care, and 66% of them were really confident in their belief that it already did. And that's not the case outside of a very narrow home health benefit. And Medicare does not cover long-term care. And so Medicaid is the main game in town for when it comes to facility-based care and access to home and community-based services. For people with disabilities and aging adults, there are big gaps there, because when it comes to home and community-based services, when the service was formed over 40 years ago, it was made as an optional service. So a little bit more about Medicaid generally. I can't go anywhere without doing a little bit of a Medicaid 101. And Medicaid is the state and federal partnership. So any dollar that a state invests in their Medicaid program and in the people that they support, they have a guaranteed federal match. And it varies by state. It can be anywhere from 50.1% all the way up to 73%. And so that means that each program is different. It means each program is called something different. So I always have to say that. Medicaid in California is Medi-Cal. It's Badger Care in Wisconsin. It's TennCare in Tennessee. It's so many people who are receiving Medicaid services, including people with disabilities, don't even realize that Medicaid is what's funding it. And it is the state-run program because it is state and federal partnership that is overseen by this federal law. The federal law includes eligibility criteria. It includes also what is mandatory when it comes to Medicaid and what is optional. Home and community-based services, when it was created over 40 years ago, was created as an optional service because at that time, facility-based care was really the main thing that people were interested in. And what that means in practice is waiting lists. So you have these state waivers that have different eligibility that play off that federal rule. And then because they are home and community-based services are optional, you see wait lists. Per the Kaiser Family Foundation, wait lists are over 720,000 nationwide. I would note that that's only people who know that there's waiting lists to be on. So we also know that there's some unseen folks there. And so that is why you see the data that Angie put out around how many unpaid family caregivers are filling in the gaps for those services. Because they're optional, states can cap them, which is why you have those waiting lists. That's how it connects to it being an optional service. So for people with disabilities who rely on Medicaid, not just for home and community-based services, but for employment supports, for so many other things as well. Medicaid also covers therapies in schools. The role of Medicaid for people with disabilities is really important for people with disabilities, and it's also really important for aging adults. And again, that's a big misunderstanding. We need to see some adjustments because we do know that a big gap too is in where the services are being received. We know that 90% of older adults want to age in place in their homes. 95% of disabled people from polling that we did with Data for Progress want to stay in their homes and communities, but that's not where the funding is. I'll talk more about some solutions and things that we're trying to move towards later, but that's a little bit more around some of the misconceptions and the really important role that Medicaid plays for family caregivers, for people with disabilities, and for aging adults. Because what I always say is that as a family caregiver, the biggest thing that family caregivers need is a system so that care can be a choice and not the only option. And that's not the system that we have where we're so heavily relying on unpaid family care to the tune of $1 trillion a year per the National Partnership on Women and Families. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Raina.
Thank you, Nicole. First of all, thank you for your advocacy in protecting Medicaid and the important support that it provides. And as you mentioned, we will revisit towards the end of the webinar when we look at federal and other initiatives, how to support, how to better support caregiving, and this basically change in the landscape of where people would like to receive services versus where services are funded. So we actually have some policy developments at the state level that are really exciting to present here today and follow. So Ben will start us with a discussion of the Washington State program, WA Cares, and then Allison will continue after Ben finishes his presentation with a broader overview of where some other states are in terms of long-term care policies and supports for caregivers.
Thank you so much, Raina. Next slide, please. As has been mentioned, first of all, thank you, Raina, and thank you to the Harkin Institute for sponsoring this forum. It's such an important issue and so timely today. My name is Ben Vecti. I'm director of the WA Cares Fund in Washington State, which is the first universal public long-term care insurance program in the country. I want to talk to you, first of all, about a Washington family that is doing the kind of family caregiving that has been talked about. You know, family caregiving is the bedrock of long-term care. It's about 11% of the people in our state provide family caregiving to loved ones. If you could please start with a video, we can hear about the story of Sunhee and Yunhee. Yeah. You click at the bottom left.
My mom was a nurse anesthetist in Korea, and we're both nurses, so it kind of runs in the family.
That was part of the reason why we were able to come here in 1974, because she had worked as a nurse and they wanted nurses to come, so she was able to bring the whole family.
Just a couple of years ago, we started noticing that my mom started to have some cognitive decline, kind of on the spectrum of dementia. Yunhee and I have had to kind of put our jobs on the back burner to really help take care of my mom.
Some days were good, some days were very difficult. I mean, it's our mom, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for her to make sure she stays as independent as possible with the support that we can give her.
If we had a resource like WA Cares, that would have been so helpful to just kind of ease some of our financial burden in trying to do this. It's very difficult. So we try to simplify her life. We do her grocery shopping, and she often will come with us, and cooking, cleaning, cutting her hair, taking her out socially, but we're creating meals that she is familiar with and that she enjoys. And we like to bring her out to do fun things too, and not just like all medical all the time. Believe me, it will affect you, whether you're younger or older, to have a resource like that and to know that the state is investing in families. That means a lot to me. WA Cares is a program that I think will benefit everybody.
Thank you. The story of Sunhee and Yunhee really highlights the fact, or sort of it contradicts a myth really that we have in our society that the ability to pay for long-term care needs is something that is only challenging for the poorest among us. That, you know, which Medicaid is there to meet that need, and Medicaid is itself under threat right now. But the story of Sunhee and Yunhee shows that these are two nurses in the Seattle area. Their mom was a nurse. They're a middle-class family, or upper middle class even, and they struggle to deal with this as well. And it's a risk to which their whole family is exposed and has lots of consequences. And our current long-term care system is inequitable in three respects. First, for people who need care, access to care is rationed by income and assets. So whereas in many other peer nations, long-term care is available much like Medicare to everyone. In the United States, you know, if you're very wealthy, you can either pay out of pocket or afford private long-term care insurance. If you're very poor and depending on the state you live in, you might qualify for Medicaid. But the broad middle class is completely exposed to this risk. Secondly, our system is inequitable for family caregivers in that the lack of a universal public program means that the burden or the workload of caring for loved ones is disproportionately borne by people who are kind enough to do this work in their families. And it's in the vast majority of cases, and over 70% of the time, it's women who do this work, and at the cost of their own health and their own retirement security. We'll talk about that more later. And third, our system is inequitable for care workers because without a public universal system, what happens is that most people have to pay out of pocket for long-term care. And when they do, they look for the cheapest possible option. And so they hire workers under the table with substandard jobs, with substandard wages, substandard benefits. And all of these inequities are embedded in our current care infrastructure. And that's why a program like WACARES that we have enacted in our state is so important because it helps transcend these inequities. Next slide, please. Most people in our society don't have a way to pay for long-term care out of pocket, and I don't think this is fully appreciated by many of us. In our state, for example, and we're a wealthier state than many, the median household income, not individual income, but household income for Washington seniors is $56,000 a year. And then among people close to retirement, 41% have no pension and no IRA savings or 401k savings. And another 42% have no pension and only enough retirement savings to replace less than 10% of their pre-retirement income. So that might be $600 a month or so. So the vast majority of people going into retirement are living off of Social Security plus whatever they're able to earn by working. And most of us can't work very long into our 70s. And then if we have retirement savings, most people tend to deplete them as they get into their mid to late 70s, early 80s. And so by the time people need long-term care, most people simply don't have a way to pay for it. And this is the broad middle class. I'm talking about 90% of our society, not just the poorest 10% among us. Next slide. And this problem is only going to get worse. This is data from our state, and it's typical for the country as a whole. The blue line here is the population 85 or older. It is going to quadruple between 2025 and 2050. So the number of families affected by an older loved one who needs care is rising dramatically. It's quadrupling in the coming 25 years. Next slide. And as a result, the ratio of people of prime caregiving age to people who are likely to need care is declining from 7 to 1 in 2010 to 3 to 1 in 2050. So even if we don't, so if we think, well, family caregiving can fill the gap here, it won't be able to because there won't be enough people age 45 to 64 to care for all the older adults, even if they wanted to. And if they did all quit their jobs to provide this care, then our economy would take a tremendous hit because we would lose so many people, the key workers in the prime of their careers. Next slide. And the consequences of family caregiving are severe. It's something that most of us do for our older loved ones if we can, but on average, a person my age, 50 or older, who leaves the workforce to care for their mother or father or their spouse's mother or father, loses over $300,000 in lifetime earnings and retirement savings. So it just sets you back. It destroys your own retirement security when you do this work for loved ones. Next slide. And the cost of this, the cost of doing nothing is significant both for families and for state budgets. In our state, in the past biennium, the 9% of the state budget was for Medicaid long-term care, not Medicaid, but Medicaid long-term care specifically. As the caseloads increase, as the age wave transpires, that percentage is going to go up and become unsustainable. And so what's going to happen is either Medicaid is going to get cut, as is already happening now, or we're going to have to ration care and make it harder to qualify for Medicaid. States simply are not going to be able to solve this problem through their Medicaid budgets alone. We need new money coming into the system, and a social insurance program like WACARES brings a dedicated revenue stream from all workers in our society into the long-term care system, which helps transcend the inequities I mentioned, but also fund the long-term care needs of my generation and subsequent generations. Next slide. Our program has was first in the nation. Initially, it had some problems with the statute, but we fixed those problems. Initially, benefits weren't portable, but now benefits are portable anywhere you go in the country, and we're even working to make it possible internationally. You'll be able to use your benefits outside of Washington. We also created a pathway for near retirees, so even people who aren't able to pay in for 10 years, if you're near retirement and you pay in at least 1 year, for every year you pay in, you earn 10% of the full benefit. So now we've reformed the program so that everybody who pays in has a plausible pathway to claiming benefits. And this year, we also enacted a supplemental private market, which means that if people want to buy additional coverage from the private market, they can do so. And these policies must take the Walk Cares benefit as the deductible and offer coverage on top of it, kind of the way Medicare supplemental does. So it gives families the ability to buy additional coverage at a more affordable rate than they can today because we cover the first tranche of risk. These policies will be more affordable than standalone long-term coverage is today. Next slide. What Cares is a social insurance program that works a lot like Medicare hospital insurance. Everybody pays in from their first paycheck to their last. They pay about 0.5% of their paycheck in. It's about $290 a year for the typical worker. And you earn a $36,500 benefit that goes up with inflation automatically over time. It's affordable, much more affordable than private insurance because you don't pay a risk-based premium, where if you have health conditions or if you're overweight or if you're a woman, you pay a lot more. Because women live longer, they pay more because in a risk-based premium setup that private insurance has. For Walk Cares, it's a community-rated premium, which means you pay a percentage of your earnings. It's a far more equitable way to pay for this insurance. And then on the back end, whereas with private insurance, you have to pay until the day you die or need care. And if you stop paying at age 80, you lose coverage. For Walk Cares, you stop paying as soon as you retire and you don't owe any more premiums. You're covered throughout your retirement. Next slide. And I'll stop there and pass it to Allison.
Thank you so much, Ben. And thanks to Raina and the Harkin Institute for bringing us all together today. As Angie shared earlier, there's a huge unmet need. And Nicole shared a little bit about where our system is now, our reliance on Medicaid, and some of the challenges that we're facing with that. And Ben shared the really exciting work that's happening in Washington, this policy innovation. He did a really great job of explaining why we need to build better ways to pay for long-term care and how that will support building a more equitable society. So I am going to share a little bit about how other states are exploring similar models to what Washington is doing. And I will just say I saw a few people put questions in the Q&A function. Please continue to do that, and we'll either answer them in real time or we'll get to them at the end. So next slide, please. There are a number of states that have considered a similar program to Washington. This graphic is actually slightly outdated. At least one other state, Vermont, should be highlighted in light green there. But there's these handful of states have agreed that relying solely on Medicaid doesn't make sense. We need to start thinking about other ways to pay for care and to really cover people who don't qualify for Medicaid but aren't super wealthy and can afford out of pocket. Next slide, please. So we see kind of a couple of steps that states take, and this is not a hard and fast framework. It's not like you have to do it in this order, and some states take a couple steps forward and then maybe go back a step. But we see that states are convening stakeholders in some way. Sometimes that's through master plans on aging or multi-sector plans on aging. Sometimes it's through other functions to really come to this agreement that we need to make a change and land on the model like Washington has of social insurance to pay for it. Then we often see them conduct an actuarial study, a technical study of all the costs. So if we structured a program to deliver a benefit to anyone who qualifies over the age of 18 versus only those over the age of 65, what would the payroll tax have to be? And all of the different levers, all those different program decisions. Then they reconvene stakeholders to use the results of that study to say, okay, given what we know, what makes sense for our state? Then crafting and passing legislation. And number 5 is very important, and sometimes people overlook it. It is continuing meaningful engagement throughout implementation. So if we go to the next slide, we will see this kind of shares where some of those states that were in light green from 2 slides before fall on those steps. So sometimes you can't really say if someone's convening or reconvening stakeholders. 1 and 3 kind of blur a little bit. But we've seen California, Hawaii, Maine, Michigan, and Minnesota have all done some sort of consideration. Some of these states are more actively reconvening stakeholders and figuring out next steps than others. In the past couple years, we have seen actuarial studies come out of California, Minnesota, and Michigan. And actually, Massachusetts, lots of M states, Massachusetts will be releasing theirs imminently. Maybe soon. We're trying to get some funding for an actuarial study in New York. So fingers crossed that we'll be able to add New York to that list. There's 2 states, New York and Vermont, that have a proposed bill in their state legislatures. Like I said, not everyone follows those steps 1 through 5 exactly the way that it was laid out on that slide. And as Ben shared, we have 1 state, Washington, that's in implementation. So all of this is to say there's a handful of states that are really in agreement that we need to be looking for new ways to pay for care. And I think the important point that Ben made was that social insurance has a dedicated funding stream. You don't need to go to the legislature every year to argue for the value of the program. And it really, everyone or nearly everyone is buying into the program, so nearly everyone can benefit from the program. Next slide, please. I also want to share a really important point, and Raina mentioned this a little bit at the beginning. We cannot forget the workforce as we're having this conversation. We talked about the importance of family caregivers, but the home care workforce is also, the paid workforce is also incredibly essential to our system. We already have a huge shortage of home care workers due to poor job quality. And that poor job quality is because we as a society have underinvested in the system. We haven't built a planful way to pay. So it's hard to invest in wages and benefits and career advancement opportunities and all the things that create a quality job. So we need, as we're exploring building these new ways to pay for care, to build intentional workforce planning and investment into those programs. I have lots of ideas about this, and coming soon, there'll be a report from the National Academy of Social Insurance on some of those strategies that states can consider. Next slide, please. So I want to leave some time. We have a couple more things to discuss, and I want some time for Q&A. So I'll just quickly go through. Next slide, please. There is, if you want to learn more about what states are doing, why social insurance, what some other countries are doing, MIT CoLab, we partnered with MIT CoLab to build this website, transformlongtermcare.com. And it has all sorts of information. That graphic with the state can go to state updates and learn what's going on in states. And I'm continuing to update it. So if you have updates on what's going on in your state, please send them my way. Next slide, please. And also on this website is a resource hub. So there's lots of articles, reports, presentations, and other publications that really outline for those who want to dig into the weeds and learn more. Next slide, please. That was it. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it back to Raina.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you for keeping us on time. If Nicole would like to join for a second, actually, I do want to stay with the state theme and talk just very briefly about why California is so different. We are doing great on time. And thank you for sending your questions again. We've answered a few more specific questions in the chat, but please send your questions in the Q&A as well as we continue the discussion. Nicole?
Yeah, definitely happy to jump in here. And Ben has also been involved with some of the folks in California, so feel free, obviously, Ben, to jump in as well. But I think California is a really interesting model, and as a disability advocate in particular, because so often in social insurance programs, while WellCare's made a lot of good advancements, because it requires working quarters that can just by the nature of how work works, leave some people with disabilities out. So it's really also important to fill the gaps in Medicaid programs in the state. And so California advocates there was the actuarial study and really looking at social insurance as a model, but the way that they're looking at it in California is doing it in a way that braids a movement toward social insurance along with advancements to their Medicaid program, which is Medi-Cal in California, so that it's making sure that whether it's somebody who is getting services through Medi-Cal or somebody who's getting services through this new or funding, but through the new social insurance program, that it lifts everybody up. And so I think that it's a really interesting model. And one that I think we'll see other states looking at. Obviously, this is all dependent on hopefully being able to stop massive cuts to Medicaid at the federal level, which will certainly impact advancements and investments at the state level. But I fully believe that we can stop it like we did in 2017. But California is kind of looking at that kind of blended model, which I think is an interesting thing and something that their upcoming gubernatorial race will probably slow that conversation down, but I think it also means that there can be some interesting conversations around long-term care as an issue that so many people in California need. But Ben, I don't know, you've been working with them as well, so I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I appreciate. For time reasons, I didn't get into that aspect of things, but it's a great point, which is that if you a good social insurance program needs a backstop of Medicaid because you do have to work to earn social insurance benefits, and even though half of the population, the working age disabled population in our state does work and is contributing to walk cares, the other half is not, and so. The Medicaid is there to backstop that. It is in our state as well, and in most states, Medicaid does that. It can always be fine-tuned, and we are certainly looking at how to fine-tune that to make sure that there are no gaps in coverage. Other countries like Germany that has a social insurance program also has something similar to Medicaid that backstops it. It's a very important component of the design. The advantage of social insurance is that it covers the 90% of people who are exposed in addition to the 80% who are exposed in addition to maybe the 10% who are on Medicaid. The downside of social insurance is that it does leave some people out, and so that's why Medicaid remains as important as ever. Social insurance is not a replacement for Medicaid; it's a complement to it.
Great. Well, thank you both. I thought it was really a great place to have this discussion here. I agree. And as we discussed, right, most of the examples internationally point to basically a tiered system. So speaking of a tiered system and what else we can do to support caregivers, there are several other developments. There is a federal proposal that has been introduced several years in a row by Representative Tom Suozzi. It is originally, as it was introduced, it had a payroll contribution. Now that has changed in the last version. It is a catastrophic insurance that also kicks in by income levels. But at the federal level, we do have legislation. And then there is obviously, there's been a lot of talk about federal paid leave, but really not a lot of progress there. But there has been progress at the state level with 13 states and DC introducing some paid family leave program. And then the other proposals that have been sort of thrown out as options include caregiver credits, and there's multiple versions of what those look like. So there is the credit that you can get through the tax system, similar to the dependent care credit. So that's one option. Then there is the idea that if you're providing caregiving and leaving work to provide caregiving, you get work credits towards your Social Security. um, um, years, and then I think these are like the two major ones, and then obviously direct payments for caregiving and reimbursements. So there was a recent study funded by the Social Security Administration that actually asked caregivers what they prefer, and so Angie will walk us through some of the findings that they just released, and then we'll get to discuss some of these policy alternatives and what the odds are of some of these other things moving forward as policies in the future.
Thank you, Reina. So I'm going to be sharing some results from a study that I did with some colleagues at UMass Boston, Mark Cohen and his team. And so we did a focus group of 25 caregivers across the country about what they actually want in terms of support. So, I mean, as we have heard throughout today, that there's a lot of but we rely on caregivers for a lot of the hours of care, and that can place a large financial, not just the hours that demand, but it can also place a really large outsized financial burden on these caregivers. So we shockingly decided to actually ask caregivers what they might actually want and what they might find most beneficial. Next slide, please. And so there's sorry, one slide back. There we go. And so there's been a lot of discussion about what policies might be beneficial for caregivers. And so some of the ideas that have been thrown out there are expanded paid leave options, direct payments from the government, or reimbursements from caregiving expenses, a tax credit for providing care, receiving Social Security credit, or respite care, etc. And so those are the six, there are other ones as well, but those are the six that we focus on in our study, and we ask the caregivers their thoughts on. Next slide, please. And so as we can see there, when we asked caregivers to rank policies, being paid directly was the most popular. So I want to be clear that when we talked about these policies with these caregivers, most caregivers responded really positively to all of them. But when we do ask them to rank them, what would you most prefer? Being paid or being reimbursed, it came out on top for almost every group across all the income spectrum, across, race and ethnicity, gender, all of the sorts. That was the overwhelming sort of preference for all caregivers. Next slide, please. And so while all of the groups ranked, being paid for caregiving or getting reimbursed for costs highly, and then they also ranked, expanded leave low, very low. There was some variation by group for some of the other ones. So non-weight respondents, caregivers ranked credit for Social Security very rather high, just right below being paid for their services. And then children and those who are still working, caregivers who are still working, found respite care particularly helpful. Retired caregivers found that less helpful, and then white respondents found credit for Social Security less helpful for them. Next slide, please. But it's important to think about other comments that we got during these interviews. And so while everyone said that being reimbursed or paid directly for the care would be extremely helpful, a lot of the other comments that we've heard was about the not just the burden or the hours required for caregiving, but just the administrative burden. And so thinking about policies that require people to prove a lot more or to go through a lot of paperwork on top of, providing care. And, some of them are also working. I think these comments really draw out some of the extra challenges that we place on caregivers. So a lot of people said that they were just thrown into caregiving and they didn't really know how Medicare worked. And that when they tried to call people up for questions, there was so much to navigate. There was a lot of time spent waiting on hold. and that the approvals, even though they qualify for certain things, the process to submit for approvals took way too long. And so that's also some things, as we think about policy solutions going forward, some things to think about as well.
Great. Well, so at this point, we will open it up for discussion, starting with Nicole, a little bit more focus on sort of the federal direction of policy, but we can open it up to the full panel. Just to set this up also, Nicole, and you don't have to start with the answer to that specific question, but I think we've gotten, that's a question we got in advance, was basically, what are the odds of any federal legislative action on this issue? And I know that's, we're not going to hold you accountable to predicting things like this,
Yes.
but if you want to touch on this as you discuss, I brought up Representative Swazi's bill and, paid leave. That's been one that we all have been waiting for some time in this space.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the current moment, it's hard to think about big swings, but I still think that there are a lot of opportunities. And I frankly think that the way that I like to think about any work that we're doing to defend programs, like we're doing right now to defend the Medicaid program, also gives us an opportunity to do a lot of public education about the program. We're obviously not, while we're defending it, going to talk about the problems, but it does allow us to show how much long-term care Medicaid is covering and what as part of why we need to save it. And so then I think that will make us have a little bit more ground to root in when we have a different makeup of things, so to where we can look at advancements and investments. I mean, and don't forget that we were one vote away from getting a $400 billion investment in, no, sorry, it only ended up being 200. But in or 150 in Medicaid home and community-based services, but 150 billion would have been transformative to the system. And so we're gonna use that as a reminder that we can get to wins, and also use the opportunity in the defense that we have now. I also think another place where there could be some bipartisan opportunity is you saw Brookings come out, and then Judy Fader and myself from Georgetown put out a paper on Medicare at home, and adding a narrow home care benefit into Medicare that got a lot of attention, but kind of got drowned out by other things. But when you look at exit polling from the last election, that was an issue that was on the top of people's minds. And so I think the more, because there are 10 million or 10,000 people turning 65 every day, this is a topic that's coming up everywhere, which means I still think there are chances for those pieces. The Wish Act is not probably the perfect vehicle, and I think the thing and mostly because it doesn't include disability at all, doesn't mean we can't address it. Everything can be fixed. But I do think that there is a lot of bipartisan energy around long-term care that we'll be able to move towards once we're not in the current defensive mode.
If I could add to that, I would just say, well, that's all true. Also, we shouldn't wait for the federal government. So it's easier to me, as Ajin Poo has pointed out in her work, the path forward, the biggest challenge we face is a cognitive challenge, that we view care as a private family responsibility rather than a shared societal challenge. And to have a transformation of that paradigm, you need to mobilize people, you need to talk to people, you need to communicate. And that's easier at the state level than it is at the federal level, because you can actually, in a state, you can transform public opinion by having conversations. Community-based organizations can do this. And that's a big part of what we've done in Washington State. And it's something often that is overlooked. In my view, you need 2 years of outreach before you're going to get a new state program enacted anywhere, because you have to transform that paradigm that people have, that I don't need to struggle with this on my own. There actually is a better way. There's a more equitable way, and it's okay to think to try to find a shared solution to this problem rather than just struggling on my own.
Thanks, Ben. And that's a great point. I did want to touch base on the portability. So the Washington program is portable, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. And so I think it's the typical sort of policy cycle. We just recently had a presentation on the state retirement savings programs where actually, interestingly, Senator Harkin, before he retired, he had a proposal for a mandatory private retirement savings account that would be universally portable, right, across it, because it would be managed at the federal level. And so that didn't go anywhere, obviously, but then that was a few years after the states had already started implementing those programs. And that seems to be sort of the logical path. I think my biggest concern is with that slide, the aging slide that you showed us. We don't have a lot of time.
No, we don't.
Yeah, as we're looking at those trends and how few people are there to support, even if the family wants to support their loved ones.
And I'll just add that Washington, thankfully, has been the guinea pig for many other states. We've already learned lots of lessons from how WACARES has rolled out in Washington, and portability was one of those. Most states who are exploring whether this model works for them have portability as one of the things they would try to include from the outset.
Great. We've had a few questions that we answered that were more specific about methodology and studies. What I guess I will post this in terms of, I know, Ben, you added the insurance option. Yeah. And so I think this has been something that I personally have learned about as I've navigated this policy topic. I'm just trying to understand overall, my knowledge of this market is that it has not been doing very well, right? Because of the huge adverse selection problems. And then, insurance raising prices to try to catch up with some of these costs, and just it's just been so how do we, and I guess it probably goes back to your comment about the talking to the people in your state. How do we build trust if that's part of the strategy, as the state is basically building a simple social insurance program and trying to combine it with some other options to finance those expenditures?
Sure. Great questions. First of all, though, the private long-term care insurance industry has learned a lot of lessons from what went wrong since the 90s. A lot of that was outside of their control. The interest rates had been 7 or 8% for decades, and they dropped to 2 or 3%. And so all of their reserves, which they can only invest conservatively, they're regulated and cannot invest in equities. They had to invest in conservative investments. They didn't get nearly the investment income they thought, and so they weren't as solvent as they would have. And then the age wave and so forth, and people living longer, all of that hurt their bottom line. But the policies that are marketed and sold today have already learned those lessons and priced those things in. So the industry is changing. Private insurance is not a great solution, obviously, for everyone. There's underwriting you have to go through, risk-based premiums and so forth. But in the American political context, we're never going to have a universal program that covers all of everyone's needs the way the Netherlands has, for example. Even Germany doesn't have that. Only Scandinavia and the Netherlands has universal coverage and comprehensive coverage. So that in America, that's never going to happen. And so we did this because it fits our political culture to give people this option to have a modest public benefit. Now, other states that want to move forward could decide to have a more generous public benefit than we have. Maybe you have a 1% premium and a $60,000 benefit, for example, or $65,000 benefit. You could have a higher premium and a higher benefit. We just pursued this because it was what was possible in our state, and it gives middle-class people the option to have more coverage so that they're not as exposed. No solution is perfect, however.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll just briefly say, Nicole, sorry. I will say, not most states that are considering it are considering a similar program to what Washington has, where it's a front end benefit, meaning it kicks in pretty soon after someone qualifies, but there's still a role for private insurance. Minnesota has considered something slightly different, where there's a 2-year waiting period. So that's a very defined opportunity for private insurance to have a role. So some of it is what's the culture of the state, and what role do they see private insurance playing? Sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. And yeah, I mean, and I just want to name that while private insurers might have learned some lessons, the market share for private insurance when it comes to long-term care has gone down every year. When we're talking about long-term care in general, all of these pieces are really strong, but even at $65,000, as an example, a facility-based care can cost that can be half a year. And that's why we also need why it all should work together so that so that Medicaid is there to fall back on, and so that we're strengthening all parts of it. But because the problem is so big, and as Ben's slide showed, coming at us very quickly, we should be pursuing every avenue at the state level and the federal level.
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick word. I agree with Nicole, so I'd like to revise and extend my remarks that she's right. I mean, really, what we should be aiming for is something like Medicare for all, where well, Medicare covers everything on top of what, covers this entirely. We should aim for universal comprehensive coverage because that is really what we need. That's the social policy need. I'm just, trying to be pessimistic or realistic about our political culture, but we should aim for what we need and achieve it as much as we can.
100% agree. Yeah, and I said this political feasibility, our policy backgrounds are there, right? Taking us there, but the politically feasible thing is what Ben is saying. But what really we should do from a policy point of view that improves people's well-being is really have a more comprehensive program and have it at the federal level and try to get it as quickly as we can. It is the top of the hour, and we've received a couple of also comments of appreciation for all the insights that this panel has brought to this topic today. So I appreciate all 4 of you, and we really look forward to having you again as speakers in the fall. Stay tuned for this announcement. We're working on following up about when the symposium will be and what the panels would look like. It's a great topic. It attracts a lot of interest. There are a lot of personal experiences. Thank you to our attendees for joining us this afternoon, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.